Hello and welcome. It's 10 o'clock on the 17th of May 2021. My name is Alexandra Fiedler and I've got 5 wonderful women as my guests today. Hello everyone, and this particular live is an absolute must see for all the people who are interested in studying in the UK, but also all these, just like me, who are interested in the mind of a murderer. So hello and welcome everyone. We're going to be talking to those 5 wonderful ladies and asking your questions regarding how to study at a British university, and in particular how to study at the University of Law in a course that is called Professional Policing. Today we've got 5 guests. You can see them here. Let me just introduce them very quickly. Here we've got KAMILA Jacques from Motivation Academy. KAMILA is the person who you can talk to if you want to study in the UK. We've got Catherine from University of Law. We've got Dean Storr, who is one of our speakers. We've got Maria Visaggio, who is the Business Development Manager at University of Law, and Jennifer Schmidt-Peterson, who is also one of our speakers. So hello, ladies. Thank you very much for joining me today. And we already have 500 people watching us and waiting for your little talk. So the plan for today, let me just give you a short plan. The plan will be, first of all, we're going to talk about routes into policing, and this will be a little talk by Jen. Then we're going to talk about stop and search. How do you stop and search? What happens when you stopped and searched? And then we'll have a mini lecture on serial murder and psychopathy, and this will be Jen. At the end, you can ask all the questions you want, and we'll be very happy to answer them. Okay then, welcome, and let's ask our first speaker, Jennifer, to start with a little talk about routes into policing. Okay, hello, welcome Jennifer, and can you please introduce yourself and tell us a few words about you?
Good morning, everyone. So I'm really excited to be speaking to you today. My name is Jen. I'm the Programme and Student Lead for Policing Programmes at the University of Law. So to give you a little bit about my background, so I am a former officer, but I also have an academic background in criminology and forensic and investigative psychology. So the kind of topics that I'm usually teaching on the policing degree in London are things such as post-traumatic stress disorder, the psychology of criminal behaviour, the theory of hostage negotiation, and we also have an optional module around forensic and criminal psychology, which if you're studying with us in London, is usually taught by me. I've also published academically, particularly in the area of terrorism and counter-terrorism. So I've got a good mixed background in terms of operational and academic experience. But enough about me, because really today is not about me, it's all about you. So what I want to talk to you about today is our BSc in Professional Policing. So I'm going to very quickly give you some information about the course, and then we're going to dive into a taster session with Dean on stop and search, and then a mini lecture with me. So what I'm going to cover is why study at the University of Law, what are the routes into policing at the moment. So there's a lot of confusion around that, so I wanted to clear that up very quickly. Who is our course aimed at, so that you can make a decision on whether it's right for you. Why the pre-join degree, which is the BSc in Professional Policing that we are offering. What are its key features? What does the course cover? And then, as I said, we're going to go into the stop and search taster, the mini lecture, and the Q&A. So just very briefly then, in terms of the University of Law, we were number 1 in the student satisfaction survey last year in England for overall student satisfaction. And I think that really shows how well our students are engaging with what we're doing, and that our approach works. So we've got a very student-centered approach, which really means you're at the center of everything that we do. So the University of Law offers professionally focused education. So we really have your career and you in mind. We have campuses at several locations. So, for example, the policing degree we offer from 3 campuses. We offer it from London, Leeds, and Birmingham at the moment. And that means that even though we have large student intakes, you will benefit from small class sizes, which means you can get a lot of individual attention from your personal tutor. So everyone gets assigned a personal tutor as well. If you want more information about a specific campus, you can have a look on our website. We also have an extensive alumni network. So a lot of people that have studied with us continue to work with us and continue to hold guest talks. We regularly have guest talks by really, really interesting speakers in the area of policing. So we had just recently the detective who finally got the convictions in the Stephen Lawrence case. We had a survivor of FGM, and we had a survivor of honour-based violence speaking to our students. So you can expect those events as well. We've got a really good employability record. Now, obviously, you will notice that I've put the LLB figures there, and that's because the policing degree is so new that our first cohort hasn't graduated yet, but we have a dedicated employability team that will help you to become a special constable if that's something that you want to do, or to gain voluntary experience in a relevant area, or if you decide to use the course to apply to the police to try and pass the assessment centre. So employability is a key theme of the course and basically of all of our courses, and very much at the heart of what we do. And so, as it says here, we've got regular employer talks, we've got talks by recruiting forces, and we also have workshops that really help you prepare to become a special constable if that's something that you want to do. Now, we also support our students in a variety of other ways. So we will guarantee an offer of accommodation to first-year students who have made a firm choice to study with us and who have applied for accommodation before the deadline. We have a dedicated accommodation team. And in addition, we also have learning support for students with any disability, learning impairment, medical condition. So we're very much focused on inclusivity. So all of that is available as well, in addition to a vast amount of wellbeing support across the university, including a confidential and free counselling service. So going to policing then. So basically, since the 1st of January 2020, there are 3 ways to enter a police force as a constable. There are some old ways that are still being phased out at the moment, but seeing as they're going to be disappearing very shortly, I'm not going to focus on those. The important thing is that our degree, the BSc in professional policing, is one of those new entry routes. So it's what's called the pre-join degree in professional policing. And it's for those students who want to study first, who want to do the degree, and who then want to use that degree to apply to a police force and become a constable. So that means it can be your first step towards becoming a police officer, but it doesn't have to be. So the degree is obviously aimed at students who have an interest in policing and those who want to become police officers. But you could also use it as a foundation for master studies, for example, for a master's in terrorism studies, or if you wanted to do a diploma in law. So really what you get is a good foundation in terms of an undergraduate degree if you're interested in the area of policing and investigation, with the added bonus that you can use it for 5 years after successful completion to apply to a police force in England and Wales if you fulfill the recruitment criteria. So it's really a healthy blend of vocational and academic knowledge and skills. And you also get some really intrinsically interesting subjects in there, such as subjects from criminology, law, terrorism, psychology, and criminal investigation. Now, as I mentioned, there are 3 routes. So what is so good about this route in particular? And really, as both Dean and I can tell you, policing is a very rewarding career, but it's also a very stressful career. So really, with this degree, you study in depth for 3 years in a safe and supported environment. And we've made it really as practical as we can. So we've got virtual reality scenarios. We do role plays in a crime scene suite. And our tutors are experts who want you to succeed and who will help you to develop these skills over time so that by the time that you finish at the end of the 3 years, you can have confidence in your knowledge and in your ability. So in summary then, some of the key features of our professional policing course are: we are licensed by the College of Policing, and we work closely together with the College of Policing and the Uplift programme regarding the pre-join degree. At the moment, we're in a transition year, but the pre-join degree in particular is going to gain more and more prominence. So we are going to see more and more police forces, particularly trying to recruit from this pool of students. And next year, the Home Office forces, which are 43 in the UK, will only be able to recruit into the police via one of the 3 new routes, which includes this route. So as I said, it can be your first step towards becoming a police constable in the UK or in England and Wales. And the content is very varied, it's interesting, and you will learn through realistic scenarios. So it's not just an academically boring course where you're listening to someone talk at you, very much the opposite. You've got access to a crime scene suite and virtual reality scenarios. And as I said, we've got a very interesting interdisciplinary team, so you'll be taught by experts in the relevant area who want you to succeed. What you can see here is a screenshot from the virtual reality scenario that I keep talking about. So you can see that we've really tried to make it practically so that we can put you in situations that we wouldn't at this stage put you in real life, but that you can develop your skills and the confidence to deal with some really dangerous situations. Really important, I just need to say this, there is no guarantee of entry into a police force after the completion of the degree. The recruitment process for joining the police is separate, but as I said, we've got a dedicated employability team who can support you into joining the police with the degree if that's how you want to use it. That said, there are lots of other things you can do with this degree. It's a really good foundation if you know you want to work in the either intelligence or criminal justice sector, but you don't know exactly what role yet. So this degree will also be of interest to you if you want to work in any of the areas that I've listed here. So specialist police support roles, border force, national crime agency, intelligence and security sector, NGO, charity sector, UK visas and immigration, prison service, probation service, any work with young offenders, civil service, victim support, offender rehabilitation, armed forces, and so on. Obviously, with all of these, you need to make sure that you meet the eligibility criteria, but this degree really is a good package and a good first step. If this had been around when I started my studies in the UK, so I'm from Germany originally, I would have gone for this because I knew I wanted to work in the criminal justice system, possibly the police, but it really sort of it has a number of options for you if you decide to do this degree. In terms of what does it cover, so some of the modules that it covers are understanding the role of a police constable, community policing and response policing, as well as obviously police investigations. You're going to look at operational policing and evidence-based policing, which is a core theme that really runs throughout the entire course. But you're also going to look at the social sciences that are relevant to policing. So you've got a module called Introduction to Criminology and Key Psychological Concepts, because we want to make sure that you've got a good understanding of the socio-cultural context in which police officers operate. You're going to look at roads policing, you're going to look at terrorism, and many, many more. And then in year 2, we also have some exciting optional modules. So we've got the forensic and criminal psychology module, which is always very popular every year. And the mini lecture that I'll be holding at later on would be probably you would be studying that kind of subject in that module. We also have an optional module on cybercrime, as well as youth crime and semiology. So semiology is the study of social harms. So things that cause a lot of harm, but that might not necessarily be illegal. So you might be looking at things such as environmental damage, climate change, things like that. So in a nutshell then, why study policing? And it's a really interesting time to join the police. There's a massive transformation happening in the police. And what we want for our graduates is to be part of that transformation. We want policing to be accessible to everyone, regardless of which background they're from. And what we're going to give you is all the knowledge and the skills that you need to tap into that potential for making meaningful change if you decide to join the police or if you go somewhere else in the criminal justice system. But really, we want you to help make policing more inclusive, more representative, and to bring it into the 21st century. So that's the information about the course from me. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Dean, for the taster session on Stop and Search.
Jennifer, thank you so much. That was extremely interesting. I realized whilst you were talking how different policing is from what it used to be even 5 or 10 years ago. It's changed. It's much more professional. Let me bring you up, Jennifer. It is amazing. And also the things like semiology, I've never heard of it. It's amazing that you can learn this in this course. One question that comes to mind: how long is the course? Is it a 3-year course?
Yes, so it's a 3-year full-time degree. There is also the option to access the course through a foundation year, which is non-specific to the policing degree, but which can act as a stepping stone if someone doesn't maybe have the grades that they need. So there's a variety of ways of getting in, but the course itself is 3 years full-time.
Very nice. Thank you very much, Jennifer. We'll hear from you later on. And now let me introduce Dean Storr. Dean Storr is a tutor at University of Law. She is a tutor and tutoring the professional policing course. So Dean, welcome, and please tell us a few words about yourself, and then we're really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm a lecturer. I'm new to the University of Law, so my first year of teaching will be September. Prior to that, I was a police officer for 31 and a half years, so I know a little bit about what goes on in reality, and I'm hoping to bring that to life for the students, the experience and the knowledge and the understanding. It's an opportunity to join policing, as Jennifer said, at a really exciting time. Lots of changes are happening. It's quite an exciting career to be involved in. So we're going to take you through a little bit of a taster today, just about stop and search. Police have many powers, and on slide 2, one of the questions quite boldly there says, why might someone be stopped? A stop and search of a person is done primarily. Guys, can we go back, sorry, to slide 2? Stop and search. We're ahead of ourselves. Okay, you might have a slightly different one to myself. We'll just leave it with that one for now. Why might somebody be stopped? Essentially, police have a power called Section 1 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984. And this power allows police officers to detain a person who's not under arrest in order to search them or their vehicle. The primary purpose of the search power is to enable an officer to allay some suspicions or concerns that they might have about that individual without actually exercising the power of arrest. The power to stop and search a person is often seen as a contentious power because they don't have to arrest, and it can't be misused. It mustn't be misused. The procedures and the reasons for searching must be lawful and they must be followed correctly. That is important. A stop and search is about trying to work out whether or not somebody's got something on them that they shouldn't have. So a police officer has very strict rules on when and how and why they can search. They can only search if they have reasonable grounds to suspect that they are likely to find, and that's quite a crucial part, drugs, weapons, stolen property, items that could be used to commit a burglary, for example, theft or deception. Certain types of fireworks. So fireworks have age restrictions on them. They also have categories. And if you are not permitted to possess a firework that's in a category of that nature, then obviously that's a reason why you could be stopped and searched. Evidence of game and wildlife offences. With policing, there are a number of offences that go back to the 1800s, and believe it or not, they're still in existence today, and some of those powers can be used for stop and search. Alcohol en route to a designated sporting event. Items made, adapted or intended to damage or destroy property, and articles connected with terrorism. So here we go. We have a little scenario for you. So take a look at this one. If you were an officer walking around a park, okay, there are a couple sat on a bench in a park shouting and arguing with each other. You go over to them and you ask them what's happening. and they say nothing. They get up and they walk off. Okay, in this situation, do you think that you have any powers to stop and search this person? Is there a way of us being able to gather some, maybe some votes or some information from our team that are listening? Lovely. So we'll give you a few minutes to just answer that one. Look at that scenario. Tell me whether or not you think the police officer has got a power to search, stop and search. Okay, so we've got a few differing opinions here. Whether they can, they can't. Lovely. Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you for that participation. The answer is no, you can't search. Okay, unless you'd seen anything that would make you suspicious of a crime being or about to be committed, you wouldn't have a power to search or detain these people. The thing you would have to take into consideration is whether or not they're having a domestic. Now, that is a different area altogether, and there would need to be other sets of circumstances that you would need to put in place for using that. But for the stop and search power, not something that you would use. A couple having an argument is not an uncommon scenario. I'm sure you've seen it yourself. You could ask a few questions just to make sure that there isn't anything untoward going on, but a stop and search is not something that you could go through. You could go over and do what's called a stop and account, depending on how that goes, based on the information they do or they don't give you, whether or not that would give you reasonable grounds to suspect that there is something more going on. One person says the other threatened them with a knife, for example, and that's why they're shouting. That might lead you to a stop and search scenario. Okay, let's have a look, see if we can carry on with our ideas as to whether or not a person could be stopped and searched. So we have another slide here, which I'd like you to take a look at. Here we've got, in another corner of the park, there are two people stood with their backs to the rest of the park. They keep turning to look over their shoulders. It looks like one is passing something to the other. And as you start to walk over to them, they start to walk away from you. Have you got a power, if you were a police officer, do you think, to stop and search here? Let's get an idea of what people would think. Okay, again, yeah, we've got some differences here. Yeses, nos. Okay, now here you can stop and detain them if what you saw is reasonable grounds for suspecting illegal activity. Okay, so this could be looking for weapons or drugs or links to previous crimes, such as stolen property. It's all about what you see. And there has to be reasonable grounds to suspect that you will find. Remember, we had that at the beginning. So the officer needs to know that there are reasonable grounds to suspect that they will find something. If you're looking for drugs and have reasonable grounds to suspect that any person is in possession of a controlled drug, then the legislation you would search them under would be Section 23 of the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971. So you don't need to use the PACE power for that reason. So there are other powers that can be used. Okay, well done, guys. Let's take a look at the next scenario and see what we think about this one. Next slide, please. Okay, this time you see a man wearing a red top and joggers that matches the description of a possible mugging perpetrator, a person who committed that crime. The mugger was known to be called Tom Clark. What do we think as a police officer this time, guys? What do you think we would do if we saw this particular person? Do we have a power under Section 1 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act to conduct a stop and search? Okay, we've got a very definite theme with this one. Lots of yeses from the audience. Thank you very much. Okay, now maybe is the answer that we need to consider here. First, you need to make, as a police officer, a reasonable attempt to confirm your suspicion. So yes, there is something that gives us an indication that this person is actually or potentially could be the person that we're looking for. If they show you identification, because that would be a way for them to prove that they aren't the person you're looking for, you have no grounds to search them. So you could ask them to provide identification, and if it's not Tom Clark, you know it's Tom Clark that you're looking for, then that would stop your grounds. You couldn't go any further. Unless the ID is, of course, forged, and you would then again need to look at the papers or the details that you're being provided and make that judgment call. However, the bigger point here is that if the person is wanted, you would arrest them, not stop and search them. Okay, so if it's Tom Clark, if you know that this is the person, the description matches, actually you'd use your power of arrest because an offence has been committed. So we can actually do that. If you search them, what would you be looking for? You must have reasonable suspicion that you will find something. So that was the power that we had. So you can see that police officers quite often can have conflicts about where they use and what they use. One of the things we do at ULaw is make sure that you understand fully what your powers are, how you can use them, and we do that, as Jen's mentioned, in a lot of the practical scenarios so that you get to understand properly. Okay, so you've met 3 people you suspect of being involved in previous crimes. You make reasonable checks and still have a strong case. This is the next slide here. Okay, one is wearing a balaclava, one is wearing a scarf covering, and another is wearing a burqa. Can you ask them to remove the items here in this scenario? Let's see what you have to say about this one. Okay. Okay, some interesting answers there that we've got coming in. Okay, ultimately, yes, all 3 of them you could ask to remove. According to PACE, Police and Criminal Evidence Act, there is no power to require a person to remove any clothing in public other than an outer coat, a jacket or gloves, except under Section 60 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. This provides a specific power to demand the removal of disguises. Only if a Section 60 is in place and at the time and the location, then a constable can use that act and section in this particular case. It requires any person to remove any item which the constable reasonably believes that the person is wearing wholly or mainly or for the purpose of concealing his identity. To seize any items which the constable reasonably believes any person intends to wear wholly or mainly for that purpose. So if all the conditions are met and you believe that this was the case, you could require all three people in the group to remove their items. Where there may be religious sensitivities about ordering the removal of an item, the officer should permit the item to be removed out of public sight. So these powers are done in public. What we're saying is that they would be out of public view. So the last thing that a police officer can do is to embarrass or cause discomfort for that person. So it would be done maybe out of around the corner, out of sight of the general members of public, which is important. And when they're asked to remove those that particular item, it must be in the presence of an officer of the same sex, and as I said, out of sight of anyone of the opposite sex. So there are some very particular rules in order for officers to maintain the sort of dignity of the individual that they are requesting that removal from. However, if you think they've committed a crime and they're wanted, then you would arrest them. You stop and search if you have reasonable suspicion that you will find something. What are you looking for and why do you suspect them? So in this particular case, if you arrested them, you would then search them under another power, which is something called Section 32 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. Lots and lots of different types of legislation with policing. A lot of them interact and overlap one another. The one thing that you will find that you will be able to determine over the 3-year course is exactly which one is required in which set of circumstances, and it becomes a little toolbox for you to be able to use and to manage to do your job properly. And that is the end of my session, guys. Thank you very, very much for listening and for participating.
Thank you very much, Dean. I really liked it, and it looks like it's a minefield to be a police officer. With all these bits of legislation, they overlap and they have to work together for you to become a good police officer. And I guess this is what the course is aimed at. So you are ready to be a police officer, and you study for 3 years to know all these bits of legislation and to be to know how to act. Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting. And now I'm gonna say thank you to Dean, and I'm gonna welcome Jen. Hi, Jennifer. We're going to talk to you again because now you are going to give us a mini lecture. And I have to say, this is the bit I am the most looking forward to, because I will give you a little secret. I have seen every single episode of CSI. I've watched CSI Miami, CSI New York, CSI Vegas. I've watched them all. So I think I could make a very, very good detective. So Jennifer is going to give us a little talk, mini lecture on serial murder and psychopathy. So there you go.
Thank you so much. That is really fascinating. And I know that certainly when I was a student and I did a master's in forensic psychology and then in investigative psychology, I was watching all of these programs, and it's really interesting because what you learn is that the media and film industry is sort of basically created this myth around this topic, and there's very much a blurring of myth and fact with regards to serial murder in particular, to the point where now in academia we have something called the CSI effect. There's a little bit of a sort of disagreement between some academics and practitioners with regards to how big of a problem it is. But essentially what it describes is that a lot of people, and obviously that would include jurors, might have unrealistic expectations of what forensic science can deliver. And if you think about shows like, for example, Criminal Minds is one that I used to watch. They solve the case reliably every time within sort of like 45 minutes. It doesn't really work that way in real life. But what is true is that as a society, we are absolutely fascinated with serial killers, and usually the gorier the better. So we love looking at Netflix documentaries about serial killers who rape, torture and mutilate their victims. So it is a topic of huge interest. And there's been some really poor research in the area as well. So what I really want to do is sort of like take apart some of these myths a little bit, so that we can look at what do we actually know in terms of the research in this area. And really,
if I may, I think that absolutely, I do agree, and I think that I do have a bit unrealistic view on how CSI work and how forensic detectives work. However, what's really fascinating is that those programs that you watch on Netflix and on telly, they give you a valuable insight into, most importantly, I would say, technology regarding fingerprinting, regarding DNA, regarding all this. I find it absolutely fascinating. But I will obviously let you now speak and give us that little lecture that you've prepared. So there you go.
Absolutely. And I have to say, what I've noticed as well is that the quality of those programs, I think, at least in my view, has gotten better. So I think really at the peak of the CSI ones, which were very much fictional based programs, where you suddenly had people that could make an image clearer by zooming in, for example. We've moved from that to now having a lot more sort of like documentary based programs on Netflix. And it's interesting because it's not just lay people. It's like these ideas find their way into law enforcement as well. So for example, the organized disorganized dichotomy of serial murder that the FBI came up with, from an empirical research standpoint, that's probably not the best way to conceptualize serial murder. But a lot of officers use this terminology. So you actually find that sometimes these concepts get given sort of like a validity just by how widely distributed they are. And again, this is sort of like why this is such an interesting topic of study and one of the optional modules that we offer. So what I'm going to look at today is defining serial murder, prevalence, offender characteristics and gender bias. We're going to look at 2 case studies, and then we're going to look at psychopathy. What is it? What is the PCLR? How prevalent is it? And then we're going to try and draw all of that together to come to a little bit of a mini conclusion.
So Jennifer, just one question, if I may. The difference between real life and CSI. In CSI, they all wear very high heels and glamorous clothes. Is that true in real life as well?
Absolutely not. And the other thing that anyone who's ever watched an episode of CSI with me has found is I'm the worst person to watch it with, because within 2 seconds I will go, oh my God, that is so unrealistic. There's no way they'd be walking through the scene without any sort of protective gear, and then get that excited about finding a little hair. Because if you walk through a scene without any protective gear, there's quite a high chance that you will, because you've just contaminated it. So absolutely, there are a number of things that quite clearly are designed for television and portrayed in a particular way. So when we look at the definition of serial murder, there is actually no universally accepted definition, but there's a lot of confusion, and the majority of the confusion centers around the official definition of how many victims do you actually need to kill to officially be labeled as a serial killer. Another point of confusion is also whether or not serial murder is a new phenomenon. And when we look at historical accounts, it actually becomes very clear that it is not a new phenomenon. So if you look at the 15th century, you have people like Gilderay, who was a nobleman who is said to have killed hundreds of young children, drank their blood, as well as engaged in other acts with them. I'm not going to detail. In the 16th century, you have someone like Peter Stubb, who again is said to have murdered several children, engaged in cannibalism. So it's definitely not a new phenomena. However, what you will find when you look at the media portrayal is that very often the terms serial murderer, mass murderer, or spree killer are used interchangeably. And obviously that confusion with regards to definition makes it very difficult as well to measure scientifically how common something is. So the term serial murder was actually coined in the 1980s by the FBI. And there's a temporal criterion in terms of what they call a cooling off period or refractory period between the killings. So that means that the person goes back to quote unquote normal life. So the original FBI definition said that you need to kill 3 or more victims in separate incidences over a period of time with a cooling off period in between. However, as I said, there isn't necessarily an agreement with regards to the number of victims. So you've got Dietz in '86 who said, well, actually, you need a minimum of 5 victims and the murders need to be completed or at least attempted in a similar fashion, and the victims need to have something in common. And there are several other suggestions from academics out there with regards to the number of victims that you need. And then if we look at the definition of a mass murderer, so if you look at DeLisi and Scherer in 2006, they say that there should be at least 4 victims killed in the same general location at one time. So with a mass murder, what you're dealing with is a single event, as opposed to a serial killer who, as we said, sort of like has a cooling off period in between killings. So mass killings happen very quickly and usually have the most victims, and they very often end with the offender killing themselves. So for example, school shootings, or in the UK, you could look at David Copeland, the Soho nail bomber, for example. And then you also have what's called a spree killer. So that's when you have killings at 2 or more locations with no cooling off period in between, so no return to normal behavior. And the spree can last from hours to days. So it can be short or long duration, but it is still considered one event. Now, based on what I've just said, it's probably clear what one of the key issues here is, and that is that whether someone ends up a spree killer or a serial killer or a mass murderer depends on the interaction of a number of variables that may not actually be under that person's control. And also the subjective interpretation of the media, as well as law enforcement, and which label they attach, very often will have an influence on what that person then becomes known as. Now, in terms of the prevalence, you'll be pleased to hear that serial killing is an incredibly rare phenomenon, and there are actually conflicting reports as to how prevalent it is. So my question for you is, why do you think that the prevalence of serial murder is so hard to measure? So why is it so difficult for academics to measure how often this actually happens? So I'm going to give you sort of a couple of seconds to put your answers in the chat. So the question was, why is it that it's really hard to measure how common serial murder is? Yeah, that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point, especially if you think about some of the really famous serial killers like Ted Bundy or Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. That was in the 1970s. So those cases may not have been, well, actually in those particular examples, those cases weren't linked initially. It took quite a while until law enforcement authorities realized that they were dealing with the same offender. And that is actually a key issue with regards to serial murder. And it links to some of the other issues there, which are that serial murders often target strangers. Many of the homicides may remain open missing persons reports. And in very many cases, the victims may come from marginalized groups such as homeless people, prostitutes, so their disappearance may not be reported. And then also, it very much goes against the pattern of that we often find in singular homicide, where you have people that know each other and where you're dealing with an expressive kind of event. So in terms of a serial killer, not only may it not be linked, but also there may not be an immediate motive that may be that may be obvious from the crime scene. So some really important points there. So if we look at the prevalence then in terms of what research has been done, so in the 1980s, the FBI claimed that at any particular time you have roughly 35 active serial killers in the United States. So Hickey estimated that that means that the serial murder rate is 0.2 per 100,000 population. If we look at the UK, you have Greswell and Holland in 1994, and that they estimated that here you have up to 4 serial killers active at any one point in time. What there is agreement on in both academia and law enforcement is that serial murder has increased. So some very interesting findings here. And as I said earlier, the often conflicting definitions and lack of a universal agreement on what actually constitutes a serial killer will to some extent contribute to the problem with measuring how common it is. And then obviously you also have things like the CSI effect and sort of ideas from fictional accounts that play into this as well. And as I said, law enforcement officers are not immune to these. So if we look at offender characteristics, what we find is that there is no generic profile of a serial murderer. So serial killers span a very broad range of human qualities, and that includes appearance, social class, and intelligence. So interestingly, you could say that most of them are actually fairly average. And very contrary to popular stereotypes, Levine and Fox, for example, in 1985 said that serial killers in many respects are extraordinarily ordinary. So some of the key findings then that I've put together for you, we can see on the next slide here. So we can see that most start their careers between the ages of 24 and 40. So that means their criminal careers in terms of serial murder. The median age of arrested serial murderers is 36. So both of those are a lot older than the figures that we would find if we look at general criminal behavior. Arrests typically occur about 4 years after they begin killing. What always amazes me, and you guys will know this as well from CSI and from your Netflix documentaries, it always amazes me how many of them actually get apprehended for parking tickets or basically for just getting sloppy because they get used to getting away with it. And then very important for law enforcement, if you're looking at their criminal history, you often find that they have a history of things such as petty theft, embezzlement and forgery rather than a history of violence. And this actually makes sense because if they had a history of extreme violence, they probably wouldn't be out there. Now, for law enforcement, knowing about the fact that a lot of them will have a criminal history is really important because that means you might already have them somewhere in a database. So that's a really important finding. So looking at a case study then, there he is. So this is Harold Shipman. He looks like a lovely old man. He actually is anything but. So he is the most prolific, or was the most prolific UK serial killer. And we can see just from the picture that he absolutely does not fit the stereotype. So 80% of his victims were female. They were mostly elderly. The youngest victim was 41. And he was a doctor, so he was a general practitioner. And in fact, in 1998, a colleague reported that his patients had a very high death rate and that they found that somewhat suspicious. So there was an initial investigation then, but it was dropped. And the second investigation only happened after the daughter of one of the victims became suspicious because her mother mentioned Shipman in the will and actually left quite a lot of money to him. So the body of that victim was then exhumed and they found traces of diamorphine. So that launched the second investigation and Shipman was convicted of murdering 15 people in 2000. Now, an official inquiry revealed that overall he may have killed 250 people between 1971 and 1998. And again, that's because he was a doctor. So in total, 459 people died under his care, and very often he was the only person that was present to certify the death. He never admitted or commented on his crimes, and he committed suicide in prison in 2004. And as you can imagine, Britain's healthcare legislation was heavily modified following this case. But he's such an interesting case because he is the most prolific UK serial killer, but he doesn't really fit the sort of like Netflix documentary serial killer stereotype that we might think of. And what is interesting as well is looking at the research on serial murder in terms of a gender bias. So many criminologists have primarily focused their research on male offenders. Yet, according to Hickey in 1997, approximately 15% of all known serial cases in the United States between the 1800s and 1995 involved a female perpetrator. And what we can see here quite clearly is this partial conditioning of our society to prevent us from believing that a woman could be capable of murder, or that she might even enjoy it. And historically, what we see is that female offenders were often seen to be mad or less than fully rational. Now, if we look at female serial killers, what we find is that the methods used are often very different, and some might say less harsh. Obviously, it depends on how you want to look at it. But Hickey, for example, in 1991 found that females tended to kill using poison, lethal injection, or things such as suffocation. If we look at the academic literature, we find that there have been very few attempts to classify a female serial murder. So most of the typologies, including organized type, were developed for males. So I thought that warrants us looking at another case study, and quite a famous one. So who we have here is Aileen Wuornos. So she was a Florida prostitute, and she shot and killed 7 men between 1989 and 1990. She was executed for her crimes in 2002 and made famous by the 2003 movie Monster, where she was played by Charlize Theron. So some of you may be familiar with that case from that. Now, if we look at her history, what we find is that she had been severely neglected as a child. She had been repeatedly raped. And unfortunately, what we find in the backgrounds of a lot of serial killers is, not all of them, but a lot of them, you do find evidence of early abuse and trauma. But the vast majority of people who are traumatized or abused as children do not become serial killers, and also do not even become offenders. So we cannot imply that there's a cause and effect relationship here, but nevertheless, we do find that if we look at the histories of a lot of these people, that there is a lot of abuse and victimization in early life. Now, in terms of Aileen, both her selection of victims and the style of killing actually resembled that of a predatory male serial killer. And for a very long time, the police actually thought that they were looking for a man. And again, this demonstrates very nicely this bias of our society on how we conceptualize women and how we conceptualize female serial killers. So there were some media reports, for example, that completely incorrectly hailed her as the first female serial killer. She's absolutely not the first, but she killed in a very masculine way, or what our society would consider a masculine way. So one of the key questions here, to my mind, is if she had used poison as her chosen method, would she have received as much attention as she did? Would she be as well known as she now is? And then the next area that I want to look at is psychopathy. So let's start with a question to you. Do you think that all serial killers are psychopaths? So if you put your thoughts in the chat. Someone saying the majority, no, yes. I like how someone said, I will never look at my GP the same way with regards to Harold Shipman. So we've got a good mixed bag of answers here. So let's start by looking at what psychopathy is. So psychopathy has a very specific neurocognitive basis that facilitates not only antisocial behavior, but also emotional dysfunction. Now, Ted Bundy, in terms of serial killers, very much coined the term. But what's really important to highlight is that not all serial killers are psychopaths, and not all psychopaths are serial murderers. However, serial killers or serial murderers may possess some traits that are consistent with psychopathy. So the key question very clearly becomes, what is psychopathy? And psychopathy is a psychological construct that is characterized by very serious deficits in a person's ability to effectively interact with others. So we know it's got a neurocognitive basis that particularly affects the paralimbic regions of the brain, and those are involved in the function of emotion, memory, and arousal, for example. So what that means is that psychopaths are thought to be emotionally, cognitively, and behaviorally different. So you're dealing with a person who demonstrates a discernible cluster of psychological, interpersonal, and neuropsychological features. In fact, only a subgroup of psychopaths are criminals. And some people, such as Robert Hare, for example, have actually said that the psychopaths that you find in the criminal justice system are failed psychopaths because they couldn't pull it off effectively. So a very interesting finding, and this links to what I said about the paralimbic region of the brain and arousal, is anxiety levels and psychopathy. So what we find here, if I go to the next slide, is that individuals with psychopathy show reduced emotional reactions compared to non-psychopaths when they're asked to imagine painful or unpleasant experiences. And they also show reduced emotional responding to threatening stimuli, if, for example, you try to startle them. So what that means is then, to sort of just summarize where we are so far, according to Anderson and Keel, psychopathy is a neuropsychiatric disorder marked by deficient emotional responses, a lack of empathy, very poor behavioral control, and that commonly results in very persistent antisocial deviance and criminal behavior. And as I said, the anxiety levels in particular are very important part of this and very important for us to look at as well from a psychological perspective. So Robert Hare is sometimes called the father of psychopathy, and he developed the PCL and then the PCLR, which is one of the psychometric tools that we have to test for psychopathy. And he describes them as follows. So he says, when you're dealing with a psychopath, essentially what you're dealing with is a social predator who will charm, manipulate, and ruthlessly plow their way through life. And what they leave is a basically trail of broken hearts, shattered expectations, and empty wallets, because they have no empathy. They don't even have the capacity for empathy. So they're completely lacking in conscience. They selfishly take what they want. They violate social norms, and they don't experience any regret or guilt. Another interesting feature is they're very often charming, verbally fluent. If you've ever seen any footage of Ted Bundy, you will find that, for example. But very often they jump from one topic to another. And if you actually focus on the content of their speech, it very often lacks real substance. And then, as I said, with the anxiety levels, obviously, high levels of anxiety is one possible pathway to antisocial behavior. So it's very interesting that we find the opposite when we're looking at psychopathy. And that, again, shows how much of an extraordinary concept in criminal psychology it is. So Lycan, for example, in 1995, argued that if you don't experience anxiety in the same way as a quote-unquote normal person would, that will make it very hard to socialize you because you're not going to learn from negative experience. And we have a number of studies that show this. So I've listed some for you here that showed that individuals with psychopathy show impaired aversive conditioning. So again, they don't learn from negative experiences. And we even have studies showing that psychopaths either fail to generate or only generate to a lesser extent emotional autonomic responses to fear-inducing stimuli. So again, their anxiety system functions completely differently. So the next area that I want to look at is psychopathy, antisocial personality disorder, and sociopathy. And that's because, again, very often these terms are used interchangeably without sort of like people looking at what exactly is the difference. So the concept of antisocial personality disorder, for example, is older than the concept, the other way around. The concept of psychopathy is older than the concept of antisocial personality disorder. What you're dealing with when you have someone with antisocial personality disorder is you have someone who displays a pervasive pattern of disregard for the rights and feelings of others. So they're likely to be aggressive, have impulsive behavior, and a disregard for social norms. It's most closely linked to adult criminal behavior. And it's included in the DSM. So the DSM is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Illnesses that we use in the UK. Psychopathy, interestingly, is not included in the DSM, and neither is sociopathy. There are also some very important differences between psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder. So both syndromes have substantial utility, so are very useful in predicting antisocial behavior. But with antisocial personality disorder, the diagnostic criteria focuses primarily on the behavioral aspects. Whereas if you look at psychopathy, as we've seen so far, you're looking at a much wider range of emotional, interpersonal, and behavioral disturbances. So psychopathy looks much more at the internal world of the offender compared to antisocial personality disorder, which is very focused on behavior. And interestingly, most psychopathic individuals meet the diagnostic criteria for antisocial personality disorder, but most individuals with antisocial personality disorder are not psychopaths. And then obviously the third one that very often gets thrown in the mix is sociopathy. And obviously some people in academia say, well, it's quite tedious. Why do academics always quibble over these definitions? But there are some very important differences between sociopathy and psychopathy when it comes to brain science, for example. So Pement in 2013 pointed this out, and they said that, well, among other traits, obviously psychopaths have no empathy, they have no sense of morality. A sociopath may have a sense of morality, they may have a conscience, but their sense of right and wrong is completely different from the parent culture that they belong to. And that difference is reflected in neurologically in the brain. So those are the key differences. And then I think I already mentioned the PCLR. So as I said, the concept of psychopathy has been most famously described by first Hervey Cleckley and then Robert Hare. And Robert Hare, obviously, as I said, now very much known as the father of psychopathy. Now, according to both of them, psychopathy is the most frequent psychiatric label that is given to serial killers. And in 1941, Cleckley wrote in his book, The Mask of Sanity, first the criteria that he thought defines a psychopath. From those characteristics from Cleckley onwards, then, Robert Hare, through his own clinical impressions, developed the psychopathy checklist, the PCL, in 1980. So if anyone ever hands you what's now the PCLR, so the psychopathy checklist revised, and you get a score over 30, then please stay away from me, because that suggests that you would be a psychopath. Now, the PCLR is the tool that is now most commonly used to assess whether someone has psychopathy or not. So the checklist consists of 20 items, and they're scored on a 3-point scale. So either no, maybe, or yes. And as I said, research indicates that a score over 30 identifies someone as a psychopath. In terms of the prevalence, so Hare estimates that around 1% of the general population are psychopaths. Cook in 1998 said, well, if you look at British prisons, you find that 8 to 22% are psychopaths. Coyd found a much higher number, so he found 77% of violent prisoners to be psychopathic. And what is really interesting, I find, is Hare talking about the concept of white-collar psychopath and saying, well, actually, you're a true psychopath. You're not likely to find it in prison. You're much more likely to find them as your CEOs, your executives on the stock market. So basically, where the traits of not having any empathy and anxiety can lead to a lot of personal gain. So again, it goes back to, you will find some psychopaths in the criminal justice system, but there are many out there who may not even commit what we would refer to as crimes in society. So in conclusion then, serial murder does not fit into cut and dry categories, and it's really important to acknowledge that each offender is a psychological phenomenon in their own right. We've also seen the gender bias and how most research has focused on male offenders due to the higher perceived prevalence. But the problem is also, obviously, if you only look in one area, then that's where you're going to find the most cases. And then, very important, we distinguish that psychopathy has a very specific neurocognitive basis that facilitates not only antisocial but also emotional dysfunction, and that is what distinguishes it from sociopathy and, for example, antisocial personality disorder. And then we also said not all serial killers are psychopaths and not all psychopaths are serial killers. So that's the end of the mini lecture. So I hope you enjoyed it. As I said, this is the sort of topic that we would look at in the optional module on the policing degree with regards to forensic and criminal psychology. And you can sort of like see how that might be an interesting area for someone who has an interest in policing and investigation to look at. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It is all very interesting, and there will be a Q&A session at the end, so we can ask you some questions. Now, thanks for that little lecture. And now I would like to invite two other ladies, Maria and Camilla. Maria from the University of Law and Camilla from Motivation Academy, and they will tell us a little bit more how to actually learn about all these things, how to become a student at University of Law, and how to become a student at the professional policing course, where you can actually learn firsthand from Jennifer and from Dean all these things that we've been talking about. So ladies, can you give us some more details? Maria, can you please speak first?
Hi. So first of all, I'd like to thank Jen and Dean. It was an amazing session. I feel like now I want to myself apply for this course. Thank you so much. So engaging, so great, so interesting, so fascinating. So as Ola was saying, my name is Maria, and I do work as business development manager for the University of Law at GAS. And I do work very, very closely with Camilla from Motivation Academy. Camilla is one of our official representatives, and she does help European students, not only from Poland, but from anywhere really, to get admitted into our university. So Camilla does know our institution very, very well. She can help you with all the paperwork that you guys need if you decide to start the application process for our university. She can give you guidance. She can help you with the entry criteria. I've been working with Camilla for a very long time, as I am her main point of contact within the university. So I do know Camilla and her team very, very well. So please, 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 if you are thinking about understanding more about this course or how to start the application process, reach out Camilla and their team, and I am sure you will get all the help that you need in order to submit a successful application. And that's all from my side, Camilla. I will let you now talk yourself.
Yes, thank you, Maria. Thank you, everyone. And I would like to say thank you because we help in Polish community to go into university and applying for such interesting courses. With this university, you can apply also for LLB law, for many master's degree, also for business degree. So if you would like to book the consultation with us, just go to our website, which is displayed now. This is the website where you can book the appointments with us. Then after this, we'll help you to prepare all the documents, prepare you for the English test, and apply to the university, and also we will guide you how to apply for finance, but we don't want to talk here about the finance. You can also go to our website, motivationacademy.org, UK, where you will find many information about universities and studying in UK.
Thanks, Camilla.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies. And I think now it's the time to bring Dean and another guest, Katrin, and we'll have a Q&A session. So all the questions that you might have, you are free to ask, and I'll display them in the comments. So the first question that we've had at the very beginning, and ladies, please decide who wants to answer this question, is this one from Ursula. What about nationality limitation? I checked some of the police job offers there, and there was clear requirement to be a British national. Would you like to answer this? Do you have to be British to be a police officer, or it depends on the force?
It absolutely depends on the force. So certainly when I was in the Metropolitan Police Force, I think the majority of my colleagues on the response team were actually not British nationals, but we're from Europe. I mean, as I said, I've got both nationalities now, but certainly when I first came to the UK, I was a European citizen. So that there are definitely a lot of job opportunities for European citizens, but it really does depend on the individual force. And what I would also look for is that, for example, the Met has sometimes a residency criteria where you need to have lived in a particular area. So I would have a look on the websites of individual forces and see exactly what it is that they're asking for.
Okay, next question. How, it's actually a question from me. How can you fund the course? Is there any help with the funding?
So that is a question I would have to refer to our finance team. They are the experts in basically providing individualized information to people that have questions with regards to this. We certainly have scholarships and bursaries available, but I'm not the best person to answer that.
I think I can answer this question. So basically, people who live in UK, they have pre-settled or settled status. They can apply for the government funding to get the maintenance loan and tuition fee to cover the tuition fees. And also you can get, for example, in London, £12,000 extra support to cover your living expenses. Also, for example, parents who wants to go to the university getting extra help for example, nanny or nursery costs. So if you are afraid that you can't cover the tuition fee, which is around £9,000, then you can get government support.
Okay, next fantastic question. I think that is important for all our listeners. Hello, everyone. Which level of English do I need to study?
I think if you understand the session, then you are ready to go to university.
That's a very, very good practical answer. Another very interesting question from Kinga. What is the difference between a police officer and a detective? How to become a detective? I like that one. Maybe Dean, do you think you want to answer that one?
Yeah, no problem. A police officer, so a response officer is what we're talking about. They would be on a team of staff working a shift pattern. They will respond to emergency calls, to incidents for shoplifting, for criminal damage, burglary, theft, go and take the reports, deal with the victims. A detective is a person who is going to be looking at cases that are a little bit more in-depth, a little bit more detailed, and so their investigative ability and their ability to build a file for court is much higher. So they're looking at more complex cases that would be investigated. The way in which you can become a detective, there are a number of routes. You will have to complete your probationary period, your student officer period within, and you could then diversify and go, in a different direction once you sort of passed everything in relation to that. There is also an opportunity to go into becoming a detective sort of right from the beginning, which is not a program that we offer, but there is a route that you can actually take. And there are some skills and abilities that you can, with the choices that you make at ULaw, the kinds of things that you add to your degree that will actually push you, if you are successful in your application, to demonstrate that you have the skills and abilities to become a detective.
Okay, thank you. Another question, very quick one. What's the average age of your students? Basically, is it too late? Can it be too late to start?
It's never too late to start if it's something that you enjoy and that you want to do. So the average age of our policing students is probably around 18, 19, but we do absolutely welcome mature students. I know, for example, that one of our policing VLs at the moment, who's in his 50s, is starting a criminology degree at a different university as well. So I would say, regardless of which age you are, if you have a passion for this subject, if it's something that you want to do, please don't feel like your age is going to be an issue either way.
And another question, and I think that's a good one to finish with. Maria, can you tell us more about the Polish entry requirements for the initial year and for year 0. So is it Camilla or is it Maria?
Well, I just would like to say something about the age. To be honest, in UK, most of our students are between 27 to 43 in regards to the age. So we don't have that many young students coming to the university when we're talking about students, people who are already living in UK. So most of our students, they are between 27 and 40 or 43. So if you are not 18, 19, don't be afraid to join the university.
Okay, and Maria,
yeah.
Entry requirements, please.
Yeah, so in terms of entry criteria from Portugal, again, it really depends if the students want to go straight into year 1 or if they want to go via the foundation year. So for the foundation year, from the new Polish Matura, for this course, we do require an overall of 40%, as opposed to if you guys would like to start from year 1, from new Polish Matura, we do require an overall of 65% and at least 2 extended written level subjects. If you have old Polish Matura, never mind, you can still apply. Or if you have any other qualifications, you might still be able to apply. And on these note, guys, I strongly recommend you to reach out to Camila's team because they can give you more guidance in terms of submitting the application, so our admissions department can review it. And of course, if you are eligible, they will release a conditional offer. Oh, another thing that I'd like to flag as well is that if you guys do apply and receive a conditional offer pending English only, then we will be able to give you a free token in order to take the language cert exam online for free. And Camilla can help you as well with the request of this token as well. So a really good opportunity for all the students who can get conditional offers pending English only.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. I think we've answered all the questions. If there are any other questions, you can always contact Camila on motivationacademy.org.uk. You can also set a free consultation, camilazag.setmore.com, and I'm sure that Camila will be able to answer all your questions. Ladies, thank you very much. I really thoroughly enjoyed that session. I think we've learned a lot about the professional policing course, but also I really enjoyed my really personal favorite, the serial murder mini lecture. Thank you very much, ladies. And if you have any questions or you want to start studying in the UK, please contact Camilla from Motivation Academy. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.